Good morning.
Good morning. How is everyone today? We're just going to wait a few minutes for the algorithm to kick in.
Okay.
All right. It's been kind of a morning already. How are you this morning, Althea?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. I'm kind of excited about this.
Me too. Unfortunately, our third cohort couldn't join us today. So let's just know that our prayers and thoughts are with their family.
Definitely.
So today's topic is physical elements or physical issues after having energy work done. I know myself, I have experienced this a few different times in my world. And recently, just about a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
So have you ever experienced anything like this?
I find it interesting because, okay, so for those of you that don't know, Michelle and I chatted yesterday, and we were talking about this. When I got into learning how to do the emotion code, like I was all over it. I was like all excited, and I was doing all this stuff, and I was releasing all this stuff. Released apparently so much that I ended up making myself sick, like physically. And like I had a snotty nose, I was congested, I had a few body aches, all this kind of stuff. And it was like, okay, maybe I should slow down a little bit. But what I have come to learn and understand, and that helps, is sometimes when we have been to this point, it's like we have not taken care of ourselves. That's kind of why we're in the state we are in. And so how do we get our bodies ready to do energy work when we're releasing all this stuff so that it doesn't happen? But I mean, what are some of the things that cause it, right? I think that's what we're kind of talking about today is, what kind of energy work, what happens when we start doing this stuff, and why do we get sick? And, one of the main reasons, and I think everybody agrees, is that, the body has to physically process the energy. So let's talk a little bit about that, Michelle. What happens to the body? You do medical intuitiveness, and so let's talk a little bit about what happens within the body. Why does it hold on to stuff, and why does it have to physically get rid of it?
Well, as we know, like our soul's around us and it's inside of us. And so our soul actually houses our body. And so when we go through energy work, our body has to vibrate at that same frequency as our soul in order for it to coexist together. And so sometimes that may mean the liver and getting that gunk on. Because when we have sinus issues, we have a congested liver. And so a lot of the times it's like we don't realize, like we see the symptom maybe up here or here, but it could be coming from our liver or our kidneys because of the anger, the frustration that we've been holding on to with those emotions for so long.
I totally agree.
A couple weeks ago, went through a healing session and realized that it was my little Shelly that was sexually abused and not little Michelle. And so I went into my Akashic records and I held her for like 45 minutes one day. And because she's never been held before. And we went in, sat there, and we just held her. About 45 minutes later, I finally come to like, wow, that was a long time. The next day, felt kind of the next day I woke up, had a stiff neck, went to the chiropractor, got it all adjusted. Well, the very next day, my glands were swollen, my throat was raw, I had the body aches. I was like, holy smokes, this is intense. So I knew that what I just cleared away was just as intense. And I used my essential oils and that stuff for that day. Woke up the next day feeling much better, able to eat and breathe and like get things going. So I knew it was because of the energy work that I was doing and not because I got some virus from the air. I mean, our bodies are such a magnificent thing that we actually will hang on to viruses until we're weak and then release them.
Well, why not?
But I also found it was interesting that time that it was my throat and my glands that was the issue with, a couple weeks ago, because during that time period when all this abuse was going on, I was having tonsillitis every other week. I was having strep throat a lot, swollen glands. I was stuttering, so I wasn't able to speak right. And so I was like, oh, and it all ended up right here to clear away again. Pretty much right where it started is also where it ended.
Now, I find it fascinating, and I guess this is my question, and maybe some other people in the viewing audience kind of have this question too, but is it possible to experience that type of a cleanse several times when you're doing energy work?
I think so, yes. If you have any questions or if you have any comments, please make sure you write them down for us, because at the end of the show, we will go ahead and answer some questions. Yeah, so I really think so, because everything is like an onion layer anyways within our soul and our world. So as we peel away one, something else is going to happen. And we could be peeling away layers and layers and layers of this healing energy work modality for a really long time until we hit that right one. And it's that right one that's going to go, now you're down.
Well, and it always fascinates me because what I do, and I talk about the emotional healing behind the physical side of it, because it's like, I mean, the physical stuff happens to bring our awareness, right? That there's an imbalance, and there's plenty of things that manifest as physical stuff, and so when we start looking at the emotional side of what's causing and what led up to, then I always find that part to be most fascinating. Like, what do we really store? So when we talk about throat issues, what are some of the emotions or the things that you could possibly be going through? Let's list a couple of them so that people kind of have an idea that how they can relate.
Well, your throat issues also has to deal with your thyroid, which emotionally is lack of self-worth, not being heard, unworthy of being heard from. So you have all of that stuff going on just right here in your thyroid. And so when we have throat issues, that's right there with our thyroid. And if we're having a drainage issue in this area, we really need to look at all of that, our voice. Is it being heard? Is it being heard too much? And again, there's a balance, right? Right. So it's like we could be over the spectrum or under the spectrum with that self-worth. Right. Both of them are still off balance. So we need to make sure that it goes right back down to where, like when we're swinging that pendulum, we're right in that middle. And again, how do we know like that we're in the middle? No one else matters when they say things. Yeah. We can walk by and go, yeah, whatever, that's your choice. Mm-hmm. And we know inside that we're holding our truth.
Well, and thank you for that point, because this is where I think a lot of us want to get at, right? We want to be able to get to that point where we have that balance. And when we start having these physical manifestations of need.
Well, when we experience headaches, it could be a bunch of different things too that's going on. So we really need to figure out, like, what have you been working on clearing? What is it? Where's your frustration at? All these different things to go, oh, yeah, this is where it's at. So with a headache, we could do, there's so many physical and emotional elements that play into this.
Well, and I think one of the things that a lot of people struggle with is sometimes we can get caught up in the amount of, right? So it's like there are sometimes when you have a headache just because you're dehydrated. It means
Right.
nothing else.
Hmm.
And so sometimes we have to literally pay attention. This is why it's so important, I think, to be in tune with your body, is so that you can tell the difference between an emotional awareness being brought to your attention or a physical awareness being brought to your attention.
Right.
um, because it's like, there's so many things there are. And this is okay, so this is the other thing that I am kind of going to bring in here. Bruce Lipton, a lot of people are familiar with his work. He's a gene biologist, and one of the things that he always talks about, and why it's so important to pay attention to the emotional healing, is he says over his course of his career uh, of being a gene biologist, is that he discovered that only 5% of our illnesses are literally handed down.
Hmm.
That is generational illnesses. He says all the rest are self induced and self invented and self created. And, I'm kind of curious, like, hearing those kind of stats, when we come to clearing energy and we start doing energy work, there's a lot of talk about generational work. And this is why I'm kind of curious about this. But explain, or what is your take on generational stuff?
Well, generational stuff, like if you recognize it within your own world, yeah, you can go and stop it from where you're at. But you can't go back and heal somebody else's from their karma shit. It doesn't
Mm.
work that way, no matter what they say.
Well, and I find it always interesting when we start doing generational work, because there are certain things that I think come down that are up to us to stop, like that chain.
Hmm.
We always talk about stopping the chain of whatever it is, violence, yelling, whatever it could be, that's kind of passed down. Maybe your parents were beaten and they only spank you, and then you don't spank your children, like stopping that chain, right? But when it comes to physical ailments like heart attacks, cancers, things like that, I mean, these are things that plague everybody. Now, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is because of something that is unique in my family. Okay, so there is not a history of diabetes or cancer in my family, not to our awareness. However, I had a brother pass away from leukemia, had a niece pass away from leukemia, and then I just found out recently that I have a great nephew that has just went into remission from cancer. So let's talk about what sparks something like that is not hereditary, that just it happens. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Food choices.
Hmm.
Another thing, because it's like, I mean, I totally get it, because I was having the conversation even with my mother and my aunt just maybe a month ago, because they both have diabetes. And I looked at them and said, diabetes does not run in our family. And they're like, yes, it does. I go, name one person before your family line, before your brothers and sisters, that had diabetes before you.
Mm-hmm.
And they looked at me and they looked at me and they started naming people. I go, those are your siblings.
Right.
Somebody who's not your sibling. And they're just like, no one. Okay, so now we're going to look at what is the food difference between what you're eating and what your parents ate or what your grandparents ate.
Yeah.
And how is it affecting your body?
Interesting.
And they just kind of looked at me and go, oh, shook their head because they didn't want to, deal with it or hear it, because that's who they are. But I was like going, it doesn't run in our family.
Isn't that interesting?
It is, because it's like, my dad's side of the family, it's always been known like either, heart attacks and cancer ran in the family. But then it's like you look at where they grow up, what they're putting in the land. I mean, there were farmers that had their land sprayed.
Right.
We all know that the people who are spraying the land are wearing this armor to protect them, but yet we don't get it if we're just out there like walking in the street or something and they're spraying overhead.
Right.
So it's like there are so many different elements that's going on today that wasn't going on 100 years ago that we need to play in effect when it comes to body and physical elements.
Well, okay, so with that, let's talk a little bit about how our food can affect our emotional healing. Because I think they play a part in together. Of course, everything is linked. And so, what are some of the things that people can do? Like, say you're getting ready to start into your own self healing journey. What are some things, food, that kind of thing, that you can do to start preparing the body to make the release or the healing of emotional traumas a little bit better?
Well, just know you got to figure out like what are some of your foods that you just crave, and then figure out why.
Okay.
So I know, like for me, when I started on my healing journey, growing up with my food allergies and issues and stuff like that, carbs meant I had enough to eat.
Mm.
So whenever I would crave breads and everything, I would have to go, ooh, why am I having this lack mentality? Like, because breads and that all meant, there's just enough. And I was like, okay, where am I having this? What's going on? What am I dealing with that I'm craving this?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to really look at like, what is it these foods really mean for us?
Now, this is kind of interesting because for a while there, I got into studying like this whole. I heard talk, and it's always been kind of exposed throughout my life, but this eating the food for the season and how your body processes that and why it's so important to do that type of a diet. And when I started researching it, it was really interesting because the things that you would eat for, say, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and Utah are not the same things that you would eat for the Dakotas, Minnesota, and Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the different areas in which people reside and the different types of foods because, I mean, we don't have berries producing throughout the winter here in Wyoming, but people down in Arizona can have berries, in the middle of winter.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about how the food for the seasons and the different areas of what you're accustomed to, how that affects your body.
Well, I find it really interesting that here in Minnesota, like when we plant and everything else, your melons
Mm-hmm.
come up ripen in the late summer, early fall.
Okay.
Okay. And so you have these melons that are full of water that you're eating and putting that hydration into your body just before winter when it starts to dry out.
Curious.
And people don't realize, like, yeah, that's needed. Like, that extra hydration is needed for that wintertime to keep things moving. And then you have your gourds and that stuff that ripen shortly after that. And they actually keep us a little full, a little bit longer, because it takes longer to process. So that way you're not eating as much during the wintertime as you would like maybe during the summertime.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're not as active.
Right.
You don't need as much food during the wintertime if you're not as active.
Right. I go into hibernation. I attempt to anyway.
Yeah, we really want to avoid the hibernation pounds.
We're up for winter, and then like, oh, now if it melted away through the winter, that would be great.
Right? But yeah, our bodies are not designed that way.
Well, and it's interesting because, like, let's talk about weight. Because this is a huge thing when it comes to emotional stuff, right? And what happens because it's like, the human in itself, like, this is one thing that I think we have to take a look at because even our skeletal structure, like, it is the same pretty much for everybody. All the bones are about the same size. They can vary in length because of our heights and things like that. But literally, like, all of our bones are the same size. And yet here we are as humans with our skin and all of our fat and all of our muscles and all of us that makes us. Why is there such a variety of sizes? There are people that are, 5'9" and, like 3 feet around. And there's other people that are just, skinny, skinny, skinny. Let's talk about what the emotional causes of are that keep you kind of heavy or put that weight on easily. Let's talk about that because I think it's important that we recognize how we speak to ourselves, like ourselves. So let's talk a little bit about the weight because I think that's another key point for everybody.
It is, but I'm gonna disagree to agree to disagree on one point. I don't think everyone has the same circumference of their bones.
Okay.
I have met women who have really, really small bones and they're really tall. And I've met women who have bigger circumference bones and they're shorter.
Interesting.
So, and how I was told when I was in school doing some health and nutrition classes is if you take your thumb and your middle finger in the one hand and see if you can fit it around your wrist. If they touch, you are a medium bone.
Interesting.
If they do not touch, you're on the larger bone side. Because no matter how big you get, your wrist will always be the same size, roughly.
Curious.
And so that's what I was taught when I was in school for some of my physical science classes that I took for my degree. And so I thought that was interesting. And there's, men and women in that class that when they put their fingers around, it like overlapped like that. And so it was like, they could really like, oh, there's a bone. So I really think we do have a different bone structure size. And then it plays into like the muscle size. How much protein did you get early on? Because protein's going to build those muscles.
Right. So what?
How much
on an emotional side? Then why do we start packing on the fat?
Well, okay, for me, I was taught to eat my emotions as a child.
Interesting.
Whenever we were crying, my mom must have thought we were hungry and told us to eat. Which, when that happens, or if you're part of the Clean Plate Club, growing up, you lose your senses on how to tell if your body's full.
Interesting.
So a lot of us eat until we're stuffed instead of eating until we're satisfied.
Yeah. Well, so cheesecake is the exception. You eat as much of that as you want. Because I do find this interesting. Like, it is, when we start eating our emotions, there are some things that are going on in our world that we start, consuming. Because it's like there gets to be a point when, the command. Now, when I was working in the offices and things like that, I would hear the ladies, talk about how, oh my gosh, if I eat that chocolate cake, it's going to go straight to my hips. Oh, if I eat that, it's going to go straight to this, that kind of stuff. So let's talk about some of these words that we use when eating. Like, how does that fit into our emotional wellness and release?
Well, that goes right into that belief. Like, if we eat something that we think it tastes good, it's got to be bad for us. Instead of blessing it, saying, thank you for allowing my body to enjoy this every once in a while, and have it and move on.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that we can start doing now to start reversing this process?
We need to start speaking to every cell of our body during a meditation and letting it know that it is whole and complete. And that it doesn't have the want for anything. Like everything is already there for it.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to start listening to our bodies. Like there's things that, out there in the universe now that are food that we're not getting anymore.
Mm.
So we need to start listening to that part too.
So if you were to take, we talk about meditations helping us clear energy and things like that. But what would be some of the words that we could use? Like I'm not very creative when it comes to thinking of meditations to restart my body or to stop one process and get it going into a different direction. I'm not very good at meditation. I never have been. Um, the the biggest thing that I can do on a meditation is pay attention to, like when I'm washing my hands, I pay attention to the water and the way the soap feels. That's about as far as the meditation that I get. Otherwise, when I sit there and try to meditate, pretty soon I'm snoring. I just, I'm like, I apparently like sleep a lot. But so
well, hey, you're not eating then.
Well, no, I do eat. I do eat. I like food. I like food and I like good food and I like creating good food. But it's one of those things where it's like, I would like to be able to have, whether it's a poem or some kind of, I don't know, statement that I can read every day that helps me focus. So what would be some of the words that you would advise people to use in their like meditation to start reversing this process to start healing the body emotionally?
I see my fat cells releasing daily.
I think that's good. I think that's really good. So let's, you know what? How about if we try a meditation? We're on here, we're live. Let's do a small meditation. Do you want to walk us through just like a 3-minute meditation? Doesn't have to be much.
All right.
Let's do this, okay?
All right. We're going to go ahead and close our eyes and take 3 deep breaths. All right. While we're in this relaxing mode, I want you to go ahead and energetically focus on the most troublesome area of your body that you think you have. All right. This time we're going to go ahead and send some loving energy going, I love you, I love you, I love you. Then we're just going to sit there for a little bit and ask for this part of our body in this loving state to become healthy. And if that means our body shape doesn't change, that is all good. Because health is the underlying concern that we have for this part of our body. We know that this part of the body will allow us to help us function every day, create healthier new cells for the rest of our body. And this part of the body is going to be the example for the rest of our cells within our body. Just going to sit there and hold the energy for a little bit. Then we're also going to hold, and we're going to say the words going to the part of that body going, I love you, I forgive you, I release you. I love you, I forgive you, I release you. I love you, I forgive you, I release you. All right, when you're ready, go ahead and take 3 deep breaths and open your eyes back up.
Now I could probably do those meditations. I love being able to kind of relax into it. And I think it's important that we learn to relax into it, right?
Yes.
We struggle so hard every day to maintain balances and schedules and times and, just this whole chaotic stuff. But ultimately, I mean, when we leave this planet, baseball practice didn't mean that much. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or getting to the store and getting that shopping list done and taken care of. It didn't really mean that much. But we put so much emphasis on worldly accomplishments. So when we start getting back to our physical body, to us, like this is the major accomplishment that we need to focus on, right? Because we are the most important. If we're not healthy, the shopping doesn't get done. The baseball stuff doesn't get met. That kind of stuff. So like it's key to be able to function efficiently and effectively so that we can meet all of the earthly obligations that we want to accomplish. So when we're talking about the energy and the healing, let's talk about this because we want to talk about like the side effects of what happens when you heal, right? So what were some of when you started into the healing process for yourself, like because we speak from our own journeys, right? So when you started into how long ago did you start your healing journey? And then when did you get doing what you do? And how has your health been? And how has it affected you through your journey?
So I started into my healing journey probably about 13, 14 years ago now to really dig into it. And then I started doing what I'm doing now probably about 8 years ago. It's when I found the Akashic records and stuff like that. And that's really when it went deep. Everything up until then was like just like gaining knowledge, surface stuff, trying to figure things out. It wasn't until I found the Akashic records and was opened up to go, oh, wow, there's a whole nother world and universe. And what is this about? And I understand this better than this. And what is...
Yeah.
And so when I started doing everything and realizing, I was like going in, clearing this from me, clearing this because, we've all had those issues within our childhood, right? That we work through daily. Right. And it was just one of those things after another. And I was like going, and the next thing I know, my whole entire world just turned upside down. It wasn't my body physically. It was my outer world that just like turned upside down. And I was like, oh, maybe I need to slow down a little bit because this is a lot of stuff that I needed to work through and try to navigate through. And that, I think, took me about a year to navigate through all of that stuff that I just turned upside down.
Wow.
Because I had to separate and take each piece by itself now to go, oh, this is what's going on. Oh, this is what's going on. Oh, this is what's going on.
Well, and how easy was it for you once you realized or could recognize the pattern or the correlation? How much easier was it then to start releasing?
Oh, once I recognized the pattern, it was like really easy to release. Because when things happen and we're in that childlike mind, and now we're an adult where we can think logically, we can go back and go, yeah, no, I don't want that stuff. It's done and over with. And it can be that easy.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have to allow it to be done. Which means that if something like that comes up again, you got to look for something different within it, not the same stuff. And I think that's where we have that tendency to keep on hanging on to things because we think it's not done yet because we're like, oh, it came back. Well, maybe it came back, but maybe there's another element to it. And that's why it came back. So once we say we're done, we have to allow it to be done.
Well, and that I think you touched on it right there is recognizing that it's not, it's not important anymore. That's how I think when you realize that it's finally completed and that it's not going to come back literally is when you totally think different about it. And by thinking different, I mean, it doesn't feel the same. It doesn't, act the same. And you don't react the same as you did the first go around or the first dozen go arounds, and I think it's important because it is recognizing the different elements that went into it because not every event do we remember who all was involved. There's reasons why we choose to block it out.
Right.
It's kind of amazing, but when we start getting to points where we can, and it's not on everything, I don't think, but when you can start going, oh, okay, well, when I was 16 or whatever, and this event happened, I don't know, I don't remember who all was there, but I can extend the forgiveness to everybody that was there, and things like that, and then forgive myself for hanging on to it for this long because, well, I collect that.
I think we all have a habit of collecting that,
Right.
which that needs to be the thing that we let go of.
Well, and isn't it interesting because, as you work through it, it's like I have found that as long as I can kind of find the humor in it, then I'm much easier and more willing to let it go. And then it'd be like, well, yeah, I can see how that helped me out, literally, just getting in my way. But when we start feeling the effects of it, well, how do you know when it's time to start healing something? How does it start manifesting in the body?
Usually, like, you kind of get this little nudge. Like something's just like going, something I just got to start working through something. I'm not sure what it is, like this part of my childhood or this part of my life. It can also start usually, okay, so when our chakras are developing, at every 7 years, it changes to another major chakra. Okay. This is my theory. The reason why a lot of divorces start happening in the 30s and the mid 30s to late 30s is because our third eye is developing. Your third eye is your bullshit detector. All right. When women are done with the guys' BS, we say we're done and it's like, that's it. Okay. Because women will always fall in love with men at the beginning and accept all their BS stuff. But it's as we get older, if they're still doing that and they haven't matured, they haven't grown up, they haven't done what they've said they're going to do, our third eye kicks in and says, I'm done with this. I did not sign up for this long term.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not my issue that you couldn't keep your word or do what you said you're going to do or have that integrity.
Right.
You know, so we end up like canceling it, leaving, being done. And then after that, when we get into our 40s, our crown really starts to open up. And I don't know if you've realized, but in our 40s, man, we really start to thrive, like knowledge on healing. That is usually when, especially women, because we're more open and receptive to all this, go through that healing.
Interesting.
Okay? So then after that, when we hit into our like late 40s, early 50s, our 8th chakra actually starts to open up with us, which is our Akashic records. That's when we get that urge that we really need to heal everything and release it and be done.
Well, it's wonderful when we can start paying attention to that. And it's wonderful when we can start doing that because, you know, it really is about becoming the healthiest we can be. Because when we're healthy, we make better choices, and the better choices affect everybody around us. Sometimes we don't understand the ripple effect that we cause by being injured and holding on to it. We don't understand how that affects other people in our circle, in our families, in our groups, in our marriages, and our children, and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when we get to this stuff, I will tell you, like when I do emotion code sessions for my children, at the beginning of the session, I just tell them automatically, like, I'm sorry I passed anything, you know, because like I don't know what they took, you know,
Mm-hmm.
from this experience of me being their mother. And so it's like when there's something that comes up that is like, you know, okay, um, I'm just going to apologize because maybe I didn't have a working knowledge. But there's other times maybe I did have a working knowledge and I was just being stubborn, you know, because,
Right.
you know, I think one of the key things that a lot of people do, and I know this is very true for me and maybe some other people can understand it, but punishing myself, trying to get at other people. That was like my mentality for a long time. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and not that it hurt anybody else really, but me. It just caused more problems for me to work through because having to work through that aspect of it was like huge, you know.
Right.
And so, um, you know, we talk about that kind of stuff, but some of the physical things that happened, like during that process of realizing that I was injuring myself, kind of awakened me to my journey. You know, it was one of those things where it's like I was working in the medical field. I was well on my way to becoming what I was wanting to be from the beginning, which is a forensic nurse. I wanted to get in there and find the details, you know. I was very excited about that kind of stuff. It fascinated me, it captivated me. And I ended up getting a pain underneath my right lung. And I I woke up in the middle of the night and I was like, okay, there is something not right. You know, it hurt to take a deep breath. It hurt not to breathe out. It hurt to go to the bathroom. It hurt to stand up. It hurt to lay down. It was just horrible. So the next morning, of course, I was working for doctors, went to the doctor, and I'm like, there's something wrong with me. I keep having this pain. And just one look at me, and you could tell that there was something wrong. Took my blood pressure, 120 over 80. Took my blood work, everything come back that they could check immediately, normal, within parameters. There was no spikes. They then sent the long-term tests off, checking for other things. Everything come back normal, within parameters. They sent me for an x-ray, everything clean. Sent me for an MRI, everything clean. Went for an ultrasound, everything clean. There was nothing going on. And they're like, we don't know what we don't know what's going on. And I am like, okay, after about day 4 of all of these tests, I'm like, there is something wrong with me. And why are we not being able to find it? Like I almost can't function. like, you could see I was pasty pale. I was, very like not, I mean, it was horrible, this experience. And so immediately one day I come home and I called up a chiropractor that my mom used to take me to as a child growing up. We always went to chiropractors. She found one in particular that was into energy work. And it's like, whatever, mom, it helped. I'm not going to lie, it helped. And so when I called him and I told him what was going on, he asked me one question. He says, "Are you wearing an underwire bra?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, "I got my reasons." And he says, it's interfering with your lymphatic system. He says, if you can find a bra that is a good support bra without the wire, he says you're going to be better off in the long run. He says that pain that you're experiencing, he says, is coming from your liver, and you need to deal with your anger. And I'm like, okay, I'm not an angry person. He says, if you drink lemon water, he says, that'll help the pain. I'm like, all right. So I drank some lemon water, and within 15 minutes, the pain was gone. I could stomp, I could poke on my side. There was no pain. I was like, huh. So then, the words, "Oh, you need to work on your anger," kept coming up. And I'm like, I'm not an angry person. I'm not an angry person. I haven't been angry my whole life. I could have been, but I wasn't, justifying all this crap that really was going on, that I had chosen to never deal with. Just push it aside, and act like it's not there. It's not there,
Yep.
And my youngest son came in that evening, and I was standing in the kitchen, and he was 8 years old. And he looked at me and he says, he says, "I can't wait to be a dad." And I'm like, well, you kind of got to, you're 8. And I'm like, why do you say that? And he says, because then I don't have to do anything. And then I was like, now I know I am angry.
Right?
But it was, through this process, like, immediately, the first thing I did was think, oh, the husband's the jerk, right? Everything is his fault. It was like, how could he do this to me? How can he, do all this stuff? But the next thing I realized is how much I turned it in towards myself. Like, how could I allow this to happen? How could I do this to myself? How could all of these things be happening? And I think that's what really sparked my journey, because dealing with my anger issue, I guess maybe I didn't realize how angry I was. I mean, I'm a pretty happy-go-lucky person 3/4 of the time. Like, out of 365 days, I have about 358 days that are awesome, that I can laugh off, that I can have a good time, that I can enjoy. I usually only have 1 or 2 bad days. And so to experience this, like, it was devastating to me. It was devastating. I went into a deep depression over it, because it's like, how do you recover from something like that? And so the physical stuff that goes on with this, headaches, nausea, bloating, retaining water, heart palpitations, knee pain, liver pain, diarrhea, constipation, headaches, blurred vision, all of that went into realizing that there was something internally wrong. And it didn't become apparent to me until I went through all those tests to find out that there was nothing physically wrong.
Right.
It was all emotional. And that's what I'm like, okay, I have got to find some way to deal with this. But who do you go to? When you look for this kind of stuff, there is no anger management classes that you can just take that tell you, at least none where I was at. And
right.
I still don't even see any anger management classes out there in the world.
No, because people don't like to admit that they have anger, even if they're a happy-go-lucky person. Like, we all get frustrated. We all get angry at something for something. And if we don't know how to redirect that anger, then it becomes a negative.
Right.
So if that anger frustrates you so much to do something about it, then it can be created into a good, positive thing.
Right.
But if that anger doesn't anger you enough to move your butt to do anything about it. It's just going to sit in your body and sit there and linger. And then it builds, and then it builds, and then it builds.
Well, and I kind of find it fascinating how when I look back now, I can see the different aspects and the different years and what age I was when certain things were going on that were physically manifesting that I didn't pay attention to.
Mm-hmm.
That's the key, because it started out as like, oh my gosh, I started getting kind of muscle pains, like them calf cramps, and you're like, oh, I couldn't stretch out the leg. So they were like, oh, you need more magnesium or potassium or whatever it is. Okay, fine. So I start taking those, and it's like, okay, and go on about my business. And then, the next thing that started hurting was I ended up getting some hip flexor pain. My sciatic nerve started kind of going off. Pretty soon, this started happening, and this started happening, and because I wasn't dealing, and I didn't recognize that I needed to deal with the anger, because there's a lot of times that we're unaware of it. We
Right.
don't pay attention to it. We don't think it's an emotional thing. We think it's a physical thing, because that's where our attention is being called. So it's like, it's important to recognize what's going on within the body, but it's also like, what do you do when you don't realize that that's what's happening,
Mm-hmm.
So when you start working through this stuff, it is like Michelle said, you peel back the layers, you peel back, and you get down to the root of the issue. And it takes a long time. There's some issues that don't go that deep. We
Right.
think they're really deep, and they're not, right? They're
Right.
super little official ones.
It's like as we're working through like the physical ailments within our own body too, in today's world, we need to really look at too, as we're doing this, okay, is it emotional? It probably is, but yet if you're releasing the emotional and nothing's changing, then we need to go, okay, is there parasites in our bodies that's hanging on to those emotions for us?
Right.
And do we need to get rid of those?
Right.
And unfortunately, Western medicine does not diagnose parasites.
Interesting.
And so that we're on our own with, and then there's the issue of, heavy metals in our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Because despite what people think, glyphosate, that stuff that's been sprayed in the air from the time you were a child, if you're in like the Minnesota area where I grew up, that stuff, if it gets into your joints, replaces the cartilage in your joints.
Really?
And so, because there's another gas that actually creates your joints to move. And so if you have joints that just click,
Mm-hmm.
it's because you have heavy metals in there.
Interesting.
And you got to get those heavy metals out. Like my thumbs have always like just clicked. And it's like, and then when I realized like, oh yeah, I definitely have heavy metals in my body. I grew up in farmland. Corn all around me was being sprayed,
Mm-hmm.
all summer long. And then what did we do in the fall? We ate it.
Right.
Not thinking anything of it. Like, okay, why is the person spraying it up in the air? And if they're spraying it on the ground, they're wearing these suits, and yet it never clicked that maybe it's not healthy for us to eat.
Right. Well, so here's the best part. And I think this is going to be able to be helpful and hopefully hopeful to a lot of people, is energy work can be done alongside of your regular medical treatments.
Yes.
Don't stop taking your prescriptions. Don't stop consulting your doctors, because you need them. Like, that's a good balance. Like, they're there for a reason. But being able to use the energy work to work on the emotional side of it as you go through and are treating the physical parts, that's the balance. And you'll be able to work through it a lot faster if you can keep the balance within it. So as we're dealing with this, like, Michelle, how would a person start working on the emotional side of it once they have the physical ailments?
Well, it's basically recognizing that they need to work with somebody. and that they're worth working with somebody.
Mm.
It's not always easy to do it yourself,
Mm-hmm.
because you may think that your body can handle all of this stuff, right? And go overboard with it. But when you're working with somebody else, they can go, oh, wait a minute, your body's feeling a little bit heavy. Maybe we need to stop. Maybe they have a program already all set up to where people's bodies don't get overwhelmed and overworked.
Right.
Because we have to allow a little bit of time in between sessions or whatever for the acclimation to acquire. And without it, hello.
Right. So how long would you recommend in between sessions with you?
So depending on the program, I have like a 12-week where we go every week for 12 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And then the first 3 weeks, what I'm doing is just prepping the soul.
Interesting.
Getting it ready to be able to handle a lot of energy work.
Mm-hmm.
And some people can start to handle it at week 3 and some people week 4.
Right. Well, and the other thing is recognizing that you do it as much as you want. There are some times when we're like, oh, I just want it all done with right now. Unfortunately,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know anybody that gets rid of it that quick. I'd like to.
Yeah, I would like to just go in and go, hey, let's rewrite over all those books and
Ka-bing!
Right? No, guys, let's really not.
But it's like being able to recognize that there is a time. I mean, I have had to start waiting at least 4 days in between emotion code sessions for me. But I've also been emotion coding for now 7 years. So I am more accustomed to what I'm doing, and I go in and I target very specific things, and that's all I work on the session. I don't do an overhaul. I work on just a couple of things at a time because emotional wellness is targeted. You're targeting events, you're targeting, these little pestery things.
Right.
So keep that in mind when you're booking your sessions. And, I think as you pay attention, where do you want to start? Make a list. Make a list of what you're experiencing. Where does it hurt? What does it feel like? And then you can reach out to Michelle or myself and start getting them sessions. Michelle and I work with each other. Now, this is the benefit of doing energy work is you get to know other energy workers and you get to experience their protocols, their talents, their gifts. And it's beneficial because what happens is sometimes we tend to be very focused. And when you can work with other people, it allows you to open up and see things from another perspective or another angle, or something is brought out that you're like, oh, maybe.
Yeah.
And that's the beautiful part about it. And so, Michelle is awesome to work with. Take it from me. I've worked with her. We work together on different things. Like, one time we even worked on the joy of mowing the lawn. Okay? So, these are things that, I realize that's not world domination or anything like that, but it is in my world when it comes to yard work. I want to be able to enjoy yard work. It's better now. It's a lot easier. I have found that it only takes 4 of my favorite songs, as I boogie way through the front lawn. Only 4 songs. Yay! So
That's good.
Boy, I'm finding that. But being able to do that, I probably would have been out there kicking the lawnmower still had Michelle and I not addressed that issue. And also then the perspective of what's killing my joy then? Huh? So I went through and emotion coded for that because it's that's why we need each other. We need each other for those various aspects so that it brings it to our attention in a new light. Sometimes we just get very focused. So don't hesitate and reach out to somebody for the help. Michelle is awesome to work with, just so you know. So take it from me. I enjoy my sessions with her.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's been a pleasure working with you too. If it wasn't for the one session where we were talking about names and that kind of stuff, I would not have realized, wait a minute, it was little Shelly that was sexually abused, not Michelle. And I was like, oh, I need to go back and work with little Shelly on that and figure that out. Because all this time I'm like, I know I've been working with Michelle and little Michelle and, my inner child. And I'm like going, okay, why is this stuff still happening? Well, that's because it didn't happen to Michelle.
Right.
It happened to Shelly.
Yep.
And even though we are the same person, under a different name, there are different energies.
Yep.
And I even with my soul contract analysis that I do, the name Shelly has a different connotation than my name Michelle.
Right.
That comes with it. And there's a little bit more challenges with Shelly than there is with Michelle. And there's more challenges with Michelle than there is with Shelly. And so it was like, okay.
Well, and I'm just going to elaborate here a little bit because I have something to say about this whole, what did you call it? The name?
The soul contract analysis.
All right. If you have not had this done, I'm telling you right now, it is the most fascinating thing that you will learn about yourself. So Michelle was able to do one for me. And within that, she sent me the little graph. You get a little graph with it that explains the different aspects of you. And then I got 17 pages, by the way, all of this stuff. Now, I'm letting you know right now, I was so excited to be able to get this because it brings I was like, ooh, yeah, that area. Ooh, yeah, this area. And so, of course, I get very excited when stuff gets pointed out because then I'm like, ooh, yes, I get to work on this. Or, oh, that would explain that. And it's very fascinating to me. I get very excited when this kind of information comes through because it's nice to have that written guide, just out there so that you can read it. So when you book your appointments with Michelle tell everybody what the name of again.
Soul contract analyst.
Okay. So this, if you book your appointments with this to get this done, this is going to launch you and be able to give you so many tools and information of where to start. Don't let it overwhelm you. Pick one or two things that you're going to work on and then book your appointments corresponding to those couple of things. Don't get yourself overwhelmed and think that you need to fix everything today. You have today and tomorrow. No. So, just take it for what it's worth and learn and really enjoy the process of healing yourself. Make sure you're hydrated for your sessions. That is key. A lot of us do not get properly hydrated. So make sure that you're staying hydrated before your sessions and after your sessions. It will help the body process. And, Michelle, I want to thank you for putting this video on here today. I hope the viewers have gotten information. I hope that they're excited to start learning more about themselves. And I hope they start booking the appointments with you. I know that we're to the end of our hour and everything like that. So did we have any comments that needed to be addressed before we close out?
Nope, none at all.
All right. Well, if you watch this and you got questions or comments, then post them in after the video. We can always come back and revisit the questions and things like that along the way.
Definitely.
Comment, put it in there and we will look forward to chatting with you. Michelle, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye, everyone.